We have a few more joining us here, so we'll just give it another couple of seconds before we start. It's 13:01 there now, so we'll get started. So you're all very welcome to this our July webinar in the A1 Momentum monthly series. We're delighted to be joined by Ruth Parker and Lauren Osborne for this webinar on key skills for wheelchair provision. Just a reminder that today's webinar is being recorded and will be available to you afterwards along with the PowerPoint. Ruth and Lauren have kindly agreed to share that with you all. You'll also be able to ask Q&A. So if you can ask these in the Q&A box, that would be preferred, but there is also the chat function. If you can try and use the chat function if you have any IT issues or general questions. And then, so just some bios. So Lauren qualified as an occupational therapist in 2009 and has extensive experience working in acute hospital settings, including surgical and orthopedic services, as well as acute stroke care. In 2013, she specialised in NHS wheelchair services, gaining significant expertise in postural assessment, wheelchair measurement and prescription, and specialist seating provision. Since 2022, Lauren has been working independently, providing specialist assessment and consultancy services. She has a particular interest in 24-hour posture management and supporting individuals to achieve optimal positioning and comfort. Ruth has over 20 years experience in social care roles, working with adults, children and young people with disabilities, both as a practitioner and in a leadership role. Ruth's specialities include adaptations and prescription of specialist equipment with a focus on reduction of or minimising the impact of restrictive practices by developing ways of evidencing professional and clinical reasoning associated with recommendations. Ruth is passionate about the promotion of occupational therapy and is actively involved with supporting those entering occupational therapy practice or new to the specialism of adaptations through publications, lecturing and presentations at conferences. So I'll just hand over to Lauren and Ruth now.
Thank you. And thanks very much to A1 Momentum for kindly hosting us today as well on the publication day of our book. So it is out now. So just bear with me. Here we go. So Ruth's going to start.
So with everything, there's a beginning. And for me, this was a conversation at a photocopier with a social worker who was telling me about a book that she'd written. And that actually led to the Essential Guide for Newly Qualified Occupational Therapists. And kind of the relevance for this leading to where we are now is, it was a book that gave me, all those years later, the information I wished I'd had when I was newly qualified. You know, that piece of paper that lets you go out into the world and practice at whatever specialism that your profession that you're working in. And somehow that led to the key skills for housing adaptations, where I was just gathering all the information. And I was telling a friend, a mutual friend of mine and Lauren's, about that book, which is a collaboration with lots of people with a wealth of experience and knowledge. And that person, a throwaway comment over a coffee was, that's what we need in wheelchair services. There's so many people who are aging out of the system who take their knowledge and experience with them and it's lost. And I'm afraid that just sparked an idea. And here we are today with the outcome of that. So basically, I went back to our next social occasion with a list of chapters I thought might work for a book and was promptly advised that I was missing quite a bit and needed to adjust it. So we did, and she connected me with Lauren, and we have worked together over this last 18 months to achieve the book.
Absolutely. Okay, so for the chapter contributors, we wanted to make sure, obviously, that the chapters were written by experts with extensive experience within the field of wheelchairs and posture management. Also, we wanted to make sure that there was a good spread of multidisciplinary representation. So within wheelchair services, you will come across occupational therapists, physiotherapists, clinical scientists, re-engineers, obviously the wheelchair users themselves. So it was important to make sure that chapter contributions from all the different members of people that deliver wheelchair services and receive wheelchair services. And we wanted to also make sure that it was balanced across industry, so from the different main service providers and also wheelchair manufacturers as well, to make sure that there was a good wealth of experience. And a lot of the people that we asked were people that I've worked with or who have taught me as well. So people that I've learned from, and I knew that they had the knowledge that we needed to include in this book. So thankfully they all said yes, and we're very grateful for their contributions.
So when we were pitching the idea to JKP, the first thing you have to do is you have to look at what else is out there. And there is information out there. There's some really good publications, but they're not pitched at that low introductory level, which I'll be honest with you, that's where I was. You know, I have very little experience in prescribing wheelchairs or provision of wheelchairs. So we took some time and we had a look at what was available. And that did identify this lack of up-to-date literature in the speciality. And however much you write and you publish articles, you never keep up with anything. We acknowledge that. So we felt that we had a book structure. It was relevant. And then again, mentioning the inclusion of wheelchair perspectives, wheelchair users' perspectives and quotes. That has really been a key part of it, and I think it really grounds it in the impact of what we are offering people and how it will be used. So that kind of for us was a really key and important part. So much so, even the publishers, when we were looking to reduce the word count, which was excessive, I'll give you that, we've written a lot. The one thing they came back and said was we couldn't remove the wheelchair users' perspectives from the book. And then alongside the book, there is actually access to supplemental resources which are online, and they give you practical teaching methods. There's videos, there's larger versions of the forms that are in the book. So really, we felt that this was quite a unique way of presenting the information that we had. Lauren.
Yeah. So the key takeaways that we thought the book offers is, first of all, we put in the life box. So if anyone's not familiar with the work of Sharon Sutherland, I would definitely recommend looking her up and reading about some of the training and things that she delivers. And this theory of the life box was created by her. These pictures show what it means, but in a nutshell, very quickly, basically in between your bottom of your ribs and the top of your pelvis, that whole section of your abdomen is known as your life box, because inside all of those, that's where all of the internal organs and all of the life generating things happen inside your body. And if your posture is affected, if it becomes squashed, like the second picture, if you're leaning to one side, it becomes elongated on one side, or if you have postural deviations that mean you then end up with a more triangular shaped life box, it can really impact the internal functions of all that soft tissue and all of those internal organs, and that can have a real detrimental effect on the person's life. So that's why posture management is so important, to make sure that we can support people in the most supportive position that their body is able to achieve. So we go into more detail, obviously, in the book about the life box. We also wanted to apply theory to practice. So having worked in wheelchair services, but also worked as a lecturer on an occupational therapy degree apprenticeship, I have a background in theory and models of practice, clinical reasoning, and frames of reference. So we've got a chat that brings all of that together specifically for wheelchair services, to make sure that that theory is linked to practice, and you can see how the different types of clinical reasoning is applied, how models of practice are applied, and different frames of reference as well to guide our practice. We've said about the wheelchair users' experiences. That was really important to us, to make sure that the wheelchair user's voice is very prominent within the book. And we've done this by having a dedicated chapter in itself, but equally throughout all of the chapters, and you'll notice on some of the slides coming up, there are specific quotes from different wheelchair users about that topic of the chapter. And we wanted to just make sure that that voice is threaded all the way through all the chapters. We never lose touch of wheelchairs, because they are the people we serve, and without them we wouldn't have the jobs that we do. So we need to make sure that we listen, and that we include them in all of the decision-making process. As Ruth explained, we wanted to make sure it was pitched at the right level, so it's the key skills to get started. It is an introductory text. Whilst it is an academic book, it is, we did write with a kind of conversational tone in mind, so that it should be easy to read and easy to understand and follow. We wanted it to be nice and digestible, and work really well with people at any level. So it can be for anyone who's already experienced in wheelchair services, and equally it could be a helpful introduction for students and for those that are new to wheelchair services. So particularly from my own experience, I think I had a one-day workshop as part of my degree training as an occupational therapist. I always knew that I wanted to go into wheelchair services, so I personally have actively sought out extra training and postgraduate study in posture management and wheelchair services. So this is our way of giving that back, and having that kind of introductory text that's available for people that want to move into this sector. And obviously the USP is the online resources that come with it too. So there's videos on how to complete postural assessments, how to measure people safely going up and down curbs, and demonstrating a turning circle of a wheelchair, and lots of different things. So have a look at all the online resources as well.
So what we're going to do now is just run through briefly the chapters. And we start obviously with an introduction, and I want to say a thank you to someone called Richard Am, who has collated a history of wheelchairs, which is fascinating in its own right, and there is a link in the book. But also we've included things like the social model of disability, because that has changed how people approach their lives, and recognizing that society and the environment are barriers. But also, it's kind of led to a visibility of wheelchair users. They're now, you see people in wheelchairs on TV, in the sport, with 2012, the Olympics really being kind of parasport to the forefront. But also kind of in books, there are books specifically written for children, introducing them to the idea of somebody being a wheelchair user, just storybooks, but the key character happens to be in a wheelchair. So I think, that's really important. But also for us as practitioners, we need to be using appropriate terminology and inclusive language. So alongside the kind of social model of disability, we have to remember ableism and be aware of that in our practice. Terminology is an interesting one. Even Lauren and I, talking about the same book, we're using different terms for the same thing. What comes to mind is tissue viability, and I think you used pressure damage.
Skin integrity or pressure, pressure damage,
You know, and we were talking about the same thing, but we were using slightly different terminology. And then we had to decide what we would use throughout the book. But we wanted it to be inclusive. And in the supplemental, there is actually a list of appropriate terminology that I can't remember who created it. Lauren, I'm passing back to you quickly.
There's an ISO standard for terminology.
That was it, sorry. And then we keep going back to it, but the wheelchair user perspectives, it grounds the book in the lives of real people. Each wheelchair user has their own priorities, perspectives and experiences, and we really just wanted to focus on that.
Okay. Then we cover wheelchair provision. So this covers the current situation across the UK. We look at mobility as a human right. So it's not just providing a piece of equipment. Actually, people have a human right to mobile life and mobility and being able to move around and go about their day. And that needs to guide our practice. We cover the legislation and the national standards that are relevant. We look at statutory services as well as slightly touch on private practice. Within that, we look at the national wheelchair tariff. So that is structure that decides how wheelchair services are put together. It gives us a model service specification and it gives the different assessment and equipment criteria. We talk about personal wheelchair budgets, what they are, what it means and how it's organised, and eligibility criteria. So eligibility criteria is individual to each wheelchair service and it is set locally. There are some common themes that you would expect. So we do talk mostly generally around eligibility criteria, but we would always recommend contacting your local wheelchair service to check what their criteria is, because there are fluctuations across the country. And we also look at different sources of funding, so things like charity funding, educational funding, access to work, and how that might sit alongside statutory wheelchair services and perhaps form part of a personal wheelchair budget. And then we also explain and introduce different organisations that are relevant to wheelchair services. So the Postural Mobility Group is our national conference and membership organisation. There is the wheelchair residents who are working really hard at making sure people have the right chair at the right time. The National Wheelchair Managers Forum and a few others as well. So they're all in the book. Have a look. So bringing the theoretical foundations and models of practice, we do introduce or describe and apply 3 models of practice. So we've got the ICF, the International Classification of Function, the POP, which is Person, Environment, Occupation and Performance, and the CMOP, the Canadian Model of Occupational Performance and Engagement. OTs on the call recognise these from their occupational therapy training. Others who are not OTs may wonder what on earth are we talking about. So these are models of practice that just guide your thinking and your approach in the way that you assess people. It just gives you a framework of areas to cover and how to make sure that we're making use of an assessment and in the most holistic way, and making sure that we are considering how that person's going to use their wheelchair within the parameters of their individual situation. We also talk about the OT process, which again I appreciate is occupational therapy specific. We're both OTs, so don't shoot us. But the OT process covers the information gathering, assessment, intervention and evaluation. So we do explore a couple of different outcome measures within that as well. And as I said before, we look at different types of clinical reasoning and models of practice, frames of reference, just to explain how we use those types of frameworks to guide our assessment process.
And in this chapter, we're looking to kind of explore the specialist area of practice, but in a very kind of bite-sized chunk approach, because whilst we can say manual wheelchairs, powered wheelchairs, actually within each of those, there's a huge variety of choice. And then you add on to that, you add on the accessories. So when you're putting those together and then making decision on your cushion that you're going to be recommending, actually, effectively, you're customizing the wheelchair to the user. You know, very few people will have a wheelchair that is as it comes off the shelf. There will be some adjustments somewhere. So it just provides that introduction to the different offers that are available. And really, the idea of this is an introduction that should be read alongside other chapters. Now, we've also included information about parts of the wheelchair, which really it's around knowing the right term and the function of that item, which is then going to aid communication. So if you are an occupational therapist talking to an engineer and you call it one thing and they call it another thing, the conversation isn't going to go as smoothly, and you know, you may end up at cross purposes. So we've included literally the most basic information in this chapter. But as I say, that's where it is the introduction to this specialism.
I'll add as well, if you don't mind, I think it also demonstrates the vastness of wheelchairs. A lot of people may think it's just a chair with wheels on, but it really isn't. And it's only really when you work in wheelchair services or you spend some time in wheelchair services that you realise actually the complexities of the equipment that we're using and the different options. So, you know, when we're triaging referrals or we're getting inquiries, lots of people don't realise that there are so many variations and different types of armrest, leg rest, backrest, and they think that we have a warehouse full of everything like we're Argos or Amazon, and we can just do a next day delivery because it's just a wheelchair. Actually, that's really not the case, and it is a clinical piece of equipment that needs to be individually assessed to that person, because there are so many options that can have a knock-on effect to that individual's ability to function and to use that wheelchair in their everyday life. So again, it's still an introduction, but it just gives you an idea of the actual breadth of wheelchairs because it's a huge area. Our next chapters look at wheelchair stability and turning circles, so looking at how you can adjust and adapt the wheelchair, so moving the centre of gravity to perhaps make it a bit more active and independent, which also equally makes it a bit more tippy, so kind of balancing that and making sure that it's appropriate for the user. Looking at turning circles and how that can be measured, how whether a mid-wheel drive, a front-wheel drive or a rear-wheel drive might have an impact on the wheelchair's movements as well. Within this chapter, we have details from another AT called Brian Abraham, who has developed an app to measure wheelchair turning circles. So the details are all in the chapter to have a look at that if it's something that is part of your role or that you're more interested in finding out more about. Then powered wheelchairs and programming looks at how you would set up a powered wheelchair for somebody, how you can adjust the programming and tweak the different elements of the programming to enable that person to be more independent or to have better control over the wheelchair. It looks at different wheelchair skills with the powered wheelchair use and some specifics to powered wheelchairs in terms of the movements, the type of drive, depending on whether it's front wheel, mid wheel or rear wheel drive. And it also talks about and talks through the different types of special controls that you can get, different types of joysticks, head controls, chin controls, etc. So it gives you a real good overview of the powered side of things. Then we move on to understanding the environment related to seating. So looking at the body planes, the axes of rotation, the full anatomy of the body and how it relates to seating and the structural limitations and postural deviations that we see and what that means and how they impact on each other as well. So often you'll see some presentations that come together. For example, a pelvic obliquity is often seen with a scoliosis. So it gives further detail and explanation of how those different sections and segments of the body all interlink and how they impact each other. Then we look at assessment and body measurements. So the assessment covers not only the actual physical assessment, but it also talks about the information gathering side of things, looking at all the observation skills that you might use within that assessment, as well as that physical hands-on assessment that you do on a plinth. Some people refer to it as a mat assessment as well. Then we demonstrate and explain how to take the different measurements. As I say, this is a good chapter then to look up the videos at the same time, where we have videos on how to do those assessments and how to take those measurements. And we also then cover documentation, so making sure that all the right things are documented, the importance of documenting certain aspects of your assessment, and making sure that that's all really clear, so that if anyone was to pick up that assessment after you, they would be able to follow your thinking process and your reasoning to be able to follow on exactly what needs to happen next, and make sure that it's clear and transparent what it is that you're doing with that person, and what's guiding your thinking into why you're choosing the products or the supports that you're choosing in order to meet that person's individual needs. Another part of the supplemental resources is we've done a very kind of generic example assessment form. So it's pulled from different places that I've worked with over the years. I've pulled all my favourite parts of different forms together and put them into one example form. It's not necessarily to say that that is the form that should be used. It's a suggestion and a guide. You may wish to use it and adapt it yourself to add extra things that you feel is relevant or necessary, and take it forward in your practice if you want to use it. Then we move on to looking at the wheelchair and the seating specification. So translating those findings, we know now that this person has got this particular postural presentation and that these are their measurements, but what do I do next? What does that actually mean? So within this chapter, we look at how you translate those. So we look at the different points of control. So for example, this is one of the images from the book, which explains where you might add supports to somebody with this presentation of their posture. It looks at building a stable base for that person and what that means and what that might look like. And then we look at building a wheelchair specification. So we have used the term specification rather than prescription, purely because a lot of wheelchair users actually don't like prescription. They find it too medical, and they feel that actually it medicalizes an aid that they use within their life that they don't feel is a medical aid. So so we used specification because it's a more generic term and makes it a bit less medical. We also cover pressure care within this chapter and looking at how you might select different types of pressure relieving cushions, and the equipment trial process and how you might then identify or rule in or rule out different products that either do work or don't work for that individual, whilst you're deciding and going through that clinical reasoning process to establish what their actual equipment package is going to be.
And so the next two chapters, the first one looks at something that is really kind of important in our practice today, which is linked to the Mental Capacity Act and its restricted practice. And we are aware that we need to understand people's kind of capacity and their ability to consent. But we also need to be thinking about how and when the wheelchair will be used. You know, does somebody, something that can be such a positive and provide independence and choice, can also either deliberately or incidentally be used in a restrictive manner. So, you know, kind of, are we looking at a situation where somebody who cannot release the brakes themselves is put in a position where the brakes are applied and left. That is potentially restrictive. We have to understand how the wheelchair will be used going forward. Even just not putting the foot plates in place, footrests in place, actually that can have impact on their sitting position, which can then prevent them carrying out an activity that they want to do. And the link to this is actually habituation, and it's something that we need to apply our professional curiosity to, especially when you're working with someone who has had a wheelchair over a significant length of time. Just because there's a child, they needed a harness, a chest harness or some form of lateral support. Actually, we shouldn't just replicate that automatically. We should be looking to see whether or not that is still required. And that brings us to kind of wheelchairs through the lifespan, because everyone uses their wheelchair in a different way, but actually as we grow, our needs and the way we use wheelchairs change. So, for a child, it's going to include play as well as access to education and mobility. A young adult may want to have a wheelchair that enables them to go out with their friends without relying on anyone else. And then as an adult, we're looking at people going into the workplace. So we do need to be thinking about how wheelchairs need to change to reflect that person's point in their life. Can I have the next slide, please, Lauren?
Yeah.
So then the next chapter is around kind of how that wheelchair is used, because again, it doesn't come down just to that assessment and adjustment. We have to think about how someone's going to get in and out of it, how they manage to maneuver it around the environment. And something that maybe people don't think too much about, but that wheelchair maintenance, it's like a car. If you ignore it and you ignore the maintenance, it's not going to function as well. And then we've included creating accessible environments, and this is not in any great depth. There are other books out there that will cover this, but it's really to think about where outside of the clinic is that wheelchair going to be used. We've got people in their homes, but also how they access the community. It may be that your role doesn't enable you to change the community, but if you're talking to someone who's using a wheelchair out there, actually understanding some of the barriers or the facilitators that are out there is really important. And then we've worked on kind of how you get that wheelchair to different places, because obviously not everyone is going to leave their home and immediately access the places they want to be. So there are different vehicle options. And then we need to think about how you access that actual vehicle. Is it side access? Is it rear access? And the safety of transferring in and out of a wheelchair, but also during wheelchair transportation. When that wheelchair is in the car, it has to be fixed properly. And there are standards and requirements that need to be met to be able to transport a wheelchair safely. And if you think about the size and the weight of some of the bigger powered wheelchairs, then that's key. The safety of the person and anyone they're traveling with is important. And then we've added in traveling with a wheelchair, thinking beyond your everyday, thinking about going out and having holidays and traveling for work. Whilst it's not a key part of wheelchair provision that we have, actually this is the end for kind of goal for some people. So we just wanted to include it. So anyone who's having a conversation with someone can actually understand some of the things out there that support wheelchair access in the community, but also kind of maybe, again, those barriers. So I think for me, really, there are kind of two questions. How will the wheelchair be used? And where will the wheelchair be used? And if we kind of keep coming back to those, these wider aspects of provision kind of have more relevance.
Okay. And then we conclude. So we sum up the different things that we're looking at: the value of wheelchair. Wheelchairs are freedom. They enable people to live fuller lives, move around, have independence, have choice and independence, not only around what they do, but also we do cover different choice and independence about their wheelchair and the features that it has. The importance of listening and observation, so making sure that we are doing a complete and full assessment and not just following a tick box process, making sure that we are having that individual conversation and we have fully understood what that person's needs are and how that wheelchair will be used and how it needs to fit into their life. Alongside that, making sure that we manage our expectations. There is inevitably compromise with all things, and we do explore different areas of compromise within the book, and then sharing our knowledge and development, so making sure that we do learn from our everyday practice, and we share that with other people. So that's why we created the book, because it is the book that I wish I'd had at the beginning of my wheelchair career, and I'm really pleased to be able to have made that for other people that are coming up behind me and within wheelchair services all over the place. So sharing that knowledge and development is really important.
And then we've mentioned throughout kind of that we've got these supplemental resources. And I think one thing that we haven't mentioned previously is that we have case studies. So, it's very easy to talk about kind of the theory of something, but actually applying it to practice, especially if you're not actually working in wheelchair services, means that we've got various different scenarios that you can kind of look at and think and reflect on what you might or might not do in those circumstances. So kind of we think that's a very valuable contribution to the book, as well as all the other resources that are there.
And lastly, we just wanted to share with you our reflections from the whole process. So for me, initially, I was really excited to share the learning and create the resource that I wish I'd had in the beginning. So when our mutual friend put us in touch and I first spoke to Ruth, I jumped at the chance because I thought this would be an amazing opportunity to create something that I'd always wished was available to me. At the same time, it was quite difficult managing imposter syndrome. I do struggle sometimes with having confidence in myself and my knowledge and skills, and the learning that I've had and how to share that. So that has been a challenge as well. There are many people who are very experienced within the world of wheelchairs and posture management and who have done some amazing work, and adding my voice into that feels wrong sometimes, but one day I'll get used to it, I guess. Editing the word count was a real interesting process. I think Ruth is a wizard at doing this. So we had to, from the original manuscript, I think we had to edit out about 30,000 words to reach the word count from the publishers, which was a monumental feat. We had to re-edit every single chapter, and the majority of that was done by Ruth. As I say, she's definitely an editing wizard, and that was a real interesting process. And just the publishing process in general has been really interesting. I've learned lots of different things that I didn't know about. I've got books and books and books everywhere, constantly. And when you think actually about the process that those people who have written those books have gone through to enable that to be on your bookshelf, it's a much bigger process than I ever appreciated. So that's been really interesting. Ruth?
Yeah, I was going to say, for me, a very steep learning curve. I'm not sure there was much of a curve in there at all. I knew very little about wheelchairs, which is kind of what interested me about collaborating with the book, because I've learned so much. But I've now got new contacts and new relationships. It's always that broadening your networking and learning. It is the same profession and it's a whole new world. That it wasn't even similar to what I'd done before. It was totally new. And then one of the things, you know, I am passionate about is supporting learning and development. So being able to kind of offer something else out there to support anyone is a key thing for me. So, you know, kind of the fact that we've got people who are actually interested enough to log in, probably in their lunch break, about this book just shows that people are, you know, are still looking to learn and develop, and this is just a little bit that we can add into the resources that are out there. So thank you.
And then just to finish off, we've got a couple of references, and there's more about the life box if you want to learn about it. And then if anybody wishes to get in touch, we're happy to continue the conversation. And
thank you, ladies.
That's done.
We just have one question. So if you have any questions, we just have, I think, 4 or 5 minutes left. So firstly, congratulations on the launch of the book. How do you see the role of therapeutic seating within 24-hour postural care and wheelchair assessment? In our experience, it is often viewed as either or choice with wheelchairs, whereas we see therapeutic seating as a necessary risk reduction measure, providing alternative postures and positions to help maintain body shape and reduce the risk of pressure injury. It's in the Q&A there. I know it's kind of a mouthful, but...
Lauren, do you want to take that one?
So I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question because I was distracted.
There's a lot of comments popping up there, yeah. Basically, how do you see the role of therapeutic seating within 24-hour postural care and wheelchair assessment? In our experience, is often viewed as either a choice between wheelchairs and seating, is the gist of it.
That's a tricky one because I would advocate for wheelchairs and seating. They're different. They have different functions. There are different needs for static seating that there are for wheelchairs. So I would always argue that both are needed. I appreciate that funding can be a barrier to that, and also general service provision of what is available. So, you know, there is a report that was done actually quite a long time ago now. I think it was in 2000 by the Audit Commission, which looked at funding across. Oh no, sorry, it was New Life did the charity New Life did a campaign report about the funding offered across all the different geographical areas of the UK, and for many of them there was no budget even set for seating. So I think we need to challenge that, and we need to case and build the business case for it, really, to demonstrate how seating is needed, wheelchairs are needed. These things are important for people, not only for them to function and live an active life, but also to actually safeguard their posture against worsening postural deviations or pressure ulcers. And it would have a huge impact on things like the care funding that's needed, or you know, additional services that are required. If people have the right seating and the right wheelchair, then they can be much more functional, independent people and not need to have additional care and additional services, additional surgeries, medications, all sorts of things that impact them just because of their unmanaged posture.
Can I just add in, I think, you know, that is one of the challenges when you're working with young adults who are kind of moving through to adult social adult services. Sometimes there's a presumption that if they have a especially a powered wheelchair, then specialist seating isn't required anymore. It's reduced that need. And if we think about where we've sat today and how many different things that we have sat on, most of us will have moved between different items of seating. Exactly. For function and for comfort. And I think we need to remember that that is something that this is just part of. Wheelchairs are just part of the offer of someone's 24 hours.
Yeah, great. Totally agree. I'm sure Norma's nodding her head there in the background as well. But thank you very much. We're at time there now. So we'll just let you get away. But just a reminder that the recording will be available shortly on our website along with the link to the PowerPoint. I've put the link for the book to buy on Amazon on the group chat. There is other outlets available as well, but it will also be on the website as well once we share that link. So thank you, everybody. And thank you, ladies, for sharing.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.